And then obviously, he gets caught on tape, saying some derogatory racist thing.
This was The Undertaker finally breaking his silence on Hulk Hogan, the racism, the backstage betrayals, the sex tape scandal, the family chaos. For decades, the dead man watched Hogan's darker side unfold while the world worshipped him as a hero. But now, he's revealing why Hogan ultimately had to face the consequences of his own actions. Let's break it down. The immortal icon's fall from grace. What happens when wrestling's biggest hero becomes its most controversial villain? For years, Hulk Hogan was the face of professional wrestling, the man who told millions to say their prayers, take their vitamins, and believe in themselves. The red and yellow warrior who body-slammed giants and inspired generations. But behind that larger-than-life persona of Hulkamania existed a far more complicated reality, one that The Undertaker, the conscience of wrestling's locker room, has finally chosen to address after decades of silence. On July 24th, 2025, the wrestling world lost Hulk Hogan at age 71 from cardiac arrest. Yet even in death, the controversies that defined his later years refused to fade, continuing to fuel fierce debates across social media, wrestling forums, and within the industry itself. And there's no one more qualified to speak the truth than The Undertaker, a man who spent over 30 years inside WWE's locker room, who witnessed the politics, betrayals, and unchecked egos up close. This isn't just another tribute to a fallen legend or a sanitized look back at a career. It's an unfiltered examination of the man behind the myth, told by someone who saw everything. This is the story of how wrestling's greatest icon became one of its most controversial figures, told through the eyes of the man who embodied everything Hogan wasn't: loyalty, integrity, and unwavering respect for the business that made him a legend. To truly understand the depth of Hulk Hogan's controversies, we first have to acknowledge the massive impact he had on professional wrestling, as both an art form and a global industry. Terry Gene Bollea, known to the world as Hulk Hogan, didn't just become a superstar, he changed the entire landscape of the sport. In the 1980s, he transformed wrestling from a regional attraction confined to small arenas and local promotions into a worldwide phenomenon that stood shoulder to shoulder with mainstream entertainment. WrestleMania itself, the Super Bowl of wrestling, exists largely because Vince McMahon took a massive gamble on Hogan's ability to cross over into pop culture and connect with fans far beyond the ring. Hogan was a cultural powerhouse. His matches drew record-breaking crowds, his merchandise sold out everywhere, and his slogans became part of everyday life. But as The Undertaker would come to realize over his 3-decade career, the brightest stars often cast the darkest shadows, and behind Hulkamania's glow was a man whose flaws would one day eclipse his legend. And in Hogan's case, those shadows were long, deep, and exposed a pattern of behavior that completely contradicted the heroic image he sold to millions of loyal fans who saw him as wrestling's ultimate good guy. No controversy damaged his legacy more than the 2015 racism scandal that ultimately ended his relationship with WWE. When leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape revealed Hogan repeatedly using the N-word while talking about his daughter Brooke's dating life, the backlash was instant, explosive, and unlike anything the wrestling world had ever seen. WWE, the very company Hogan had helped turn into a global empire through decades of main events and pay-per-view records, acted swiftly. Within hours, they terminated his contract, erased his name and image from their website, and even removed him from the Hall of Fame he once headlined. But what made the incident even more unsettling was the content of the audio itself. Hogan didn't just use offensive language. He expressed disgust over his daughter dating a black man and openly admitted, "I am racist," to a point. These weren't just careless words. They hinted at deeply rooted prejudice that shattered the all-American hero image he had spent years building. When Hogan finally spoke publicly about the scandal, he tried to explain the context, claiming he was in a dark place emotionally, but by then, the damage was already done.
It was probably the worst day of my life when I said that 8 years ago. I had bottomed out. I was having some problems with the marriage and financially, and the kids, of course, and I was kind of mad at my daughter, and there was a weird situation where I said what I said.
The Undertaker's response to the controversy was calm but firm, refusing to make excuses for something that couldn't be justified, while still recognizing the reality of the situation. He didn't lash out or sensationalize the scandal. Instead, he approached it with the same composure that defined his career. To him, accountability mattered more than image, and Hogan's words had consequences that couldn't simply be erased by past accomplishments.
And obviously, he gets caught on tape, saying some derogatory racist things.
But The Undertaker went a step further, addressing not only Hogan's racist remarks, but also what they revealed about how modern audiences respond and what is now expected of public figures in the age of social media. He explained that today's fans demand authenticity and accountability, and when someone's private actions contradict their public image, the backlash is inevitable. In an era where nothing stays hidden, he said, the truth always finds its way out, and when it does, it can completely redefine a legacy.
You know, in this day and age where all of that is such a hot button deal, like I don't know what you expect. Like
I think
people
also,
are gonna, you know, they're gonna react, and they're not gonna react in a positive way.
The Undertaker's words carried tremendous weight because they came from someone who had lived through every era of the business, from the territorial days to the global juggernaut WWE became. He had seen the cost of fame up close, the egos, the manipulation, and the moral compromises that often came with success. When he spoke about Hogan, it wasn't as an outsider passing judgment, but as a peer who understood both the pressures and the choices that shaped a man's legacy. That perspective gave his comments a level of gravity few others could match.
I think also the other part too is, I think the fans themselves have found out what kind of locker room guy he was, and it means a lot to the fans that you're a good locker room guy as well. You know what I mean?
But the racism scandal, as damaging as it was to Hogan's public image and legacy, was only one chapter in a long history of controversies that would shock even the most devoted Hulkamaniacs and force them to confront the reality of who their hero truly was beneath the muscles, the mustache, the betrayals, and the politics. If the racism scandal exposed Hogan's personal prejudices, then the 1986 incident involving Jesse the Body, Ventura's attempt to unionize WWE wrestlers revealed something perhaps even more consequential for his reputation within the industry itself: his willingness to put his own interests above the well-being, safety, and financial security of his peers. In the mid-1980s, ahead of WrestleMania 2, Ventura organized his fellow performers to demand fair pay, health insurance, retirement benefits, and basic protections that other entertainment workers often took for granted. Wrestlers were classified as independent contractors, leaving them without the safeguards employees normally enjoyed, and the grueling schedule they endured regularly destroyed their bodies and shortened their careers. Ventura saw an opportunity to challenge this system and improve conditions, but Hogan's actions would undermine that effort in a way that left lasting scars on his professional legacy. The plan was straightforward, but depended entirely on solidarity. If the roster stood united, they could pressure WWE to provide basic protections and health care that might save lives and prevent the financial ruin that had claimed so many retired wrestlers. But when Ventura approached Hogan, the company's biggest star, whose support could have made all the difference, Hogan did the unthinkable, committing what many consider the ultimate betrayal in wrestling history. He went straight to Vince McMahon, bypassing his fellow wrestlers entirely, and revealed the unionization effort, allowing McMahon to threaten immediate firings and effectively crush the movement before it could gain traction or leverage. Ventura only discovered Hogan's betrayal during a 1991 lawsuit against McMahon, when McMahon confirmed under oath that Hogan had been the informant who ratted out his peers in the locker room. The revelation destroyed their friendship, permanently and irreparably. Years later, Ventura recounted the precise moment he learned the truth, a memory that remained bitter and defining in his view of Hogan.
I got feelings. I got feelings for people. Like, sometimes in life, things come.
The impact of Hogan's betrayal cannot be overstated and still echoes through the wrestling industry today. When asked decades later about the possibility of reconciliation, after both men had aged and supposedly softened, Ventura's response was unwavering, reflecting the lasting depth of the wound Hogan's actions had inflicted, and making clear that some betrayals leave marks that time cannot heal.
Did you feel bad for him? No.
Hogan's betrayal had long-lasting consequences for every wrestler who came after him, shaping a culture where performers lacked basic protections for generations. Even today, WWE wrestlers have no union and no guaranteed health insurance from the company, despite enduring injuries that demand extensive medical care and facing limited safeguards. The grueling physical toll of their profession leaves many crippled or addicted to painkillers by their 40s, and Ventura's assessment of Hogan's actions was damning. He had betrayed every wrestler on the roster and every performer who entered the business afterward. The failed unionization effort ensured that countless injuries, bankruptcies, addictions, and premature deaths would continue unchecked. Hogan's pattern of backstage politicking and self-serving manipulation extended well beyond that betrayal. His dealings with Bret the Hitman Hart highlighted this behavior, as Hogan reportedly used creative control clauses to protect his status at the top, regardless of storyline logic or who deserved opportunities. At WrestleMania 9 in 1993, Hogan allegedly influenced McMahon to change the planned finish at the last minute, winning the WWF Championship from Yokozuna in an impromptu match after Hart had lost the title in the main event, denying Hart a rematch and an extended run that could have elevated his career. Later that year, Hart claimed Hogan refused to lose cleanly to him, telling him he wasn't doing business with him and lying about future plans to string him along. Hogan addressed the controversy years later, but his version portrayed Hart as unreasonable, further illustrating the tensions and mistrust that defined their relationship.
And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize. I found that out under federal deposition when Vince was put under sworn, and he didn't hesitate at all.
Hogan continued to explain his perspective on the controversial WrestleMania 9 finish and the events that followed, insisting that his decisions were justified from his point of view and that he had acted to protect his position and legacy, while also claiming that misunderstandings and miscommunications had contributed to the tensions with Bret Hart and other wrestlers involved.
What? Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. I have to have a trust with someone to be their friend.
But Hart's version painted a very different picture, one of broken promises, backstage politics, and Vince McMahon siding with Hogan's account over Hart's, leaving Hart frustrated and sidelined while Hogan maintained his top spot.
Bret Hart, who thought I basically sabotaged his career because Bret thought he should have been the greatest wrestler that ever lived. And he said it was my fault. I won the belt from Yokozuna at WrestleMania.
This incident became a prime example of what the wrestling world came to call Hulkamania politics, where Hogan allegedly buried talent and sabotaged pushes to protect his dominance at the top of the card, regardless of who deserved opportunities. Hart repeatedly called Hogan a liar and criticized him as limited in the ring, accusations that gained credibility as more wrestlers came forward with similar stories of backstage manipulation by the Hulkster. The pattern was undeniable. Hogan used his influence with Vince McMahon and leveraged creative control clauses to stay at the top, often at the expense of the company's long-term health and the careers and livelihoods of his peers. Perhaps no relationship illustrated the personal cost of working with Hogan more than his connection with Macho Man Randy Savage, a friendship that eventually dissolved into 8 years of silence. While their on-screen Mega Powers feud from 1988 to 1989 was legendary and generated massive revenue for WWE, real-life tensions arose from jealousy and paranoia over Savage's wife, Miss Elizabeth. Savage reportedly feared Hogan's close friendship with Elizabeth, leading to accusations of inappropriate behavior that poisoned their relationship for years and created an uneasy backstage environment. When discussing his biggest personal conflict in wrestling, Hogan acknowledged just how deep the fallout with Savage had been.
Bret got in my face. He said, "Hey, you're supposed to drop the belt to me." I said, "No, I'm not." Vince looked at Bret and said, "Bret, that's what you thought you heard." So ever since then, he hated my guts and wanted to kill.
The rift between Hogan and Savage ran deep, driven by personal drama, professional jealousy, and allegations that were never fully clarified for the public, leaving a lasting tension that colored both their careers and the backstage environment for years.
Who was your biggest personal beef with outside the ring?
It was Macho Man. And when he lived on the beach here, we were together every single day.
Tensions allegedly escalated when Savage reportedly punched Hogan, leaving him with a black eye just before WrestleMania 9, an incident later confirmed by wrestler Scott Steiner in interviews. Hogan claimed it was only a jet ski accident, but the story fueled ongoing rumors of a deeper rift involving Miss Elizabeth that never fully healed, even after their supposed reconciliation. Their friendship worsened following Savage's divorce, and many credible voices in the wrestling community believed Hogan played a key role in blocking Savage from returning to WWE during his later years, despite Savage's desire to come back. Yet, even these backstage conflicts and professional betrayals pale compared to the personal scandals that would rock Hogan's world and expose the messy private life behind the public persona of America's hero. While Hogan's professional controversies harmed his reputation among industry insiders and hardcore fans, it was his personal scandals that truly shocked the mainstream and forced casual audiences to confront the wide gap between the character and the man. The sex tape scandal that surfaced publicly in 2012 didn't just embarrass Hogan or strain his family relationships, it permanently altered how the world viewed him. The scandal directly led to the racism, controversy that would come to define Hogan's later years and sparked one of the most significant legal battles in media history, with consequences far beyond wrestling. In 2007, a sex tape was secretly recorded featuring Hogan with Heather Clem, the wife of radio personality Bubba the Love Sponge, without Hogan's knowledge or consent. When Gawker Media published portions of the tape in 2012, Hogan filed an invasion of privacy lawsuit that ultimately awarded him $140 million in damages and bankrupted the once powerful media outlet. The case, notably funded by billionaire Peter Thiel, due to his personal vendetta against Gawker for outing him as gay years earlier, ignited widespread debate about privacy rights versus freedom of the press and the influence of wealthy benefactors on media companies. Beyond the legal and First Amendment implications, the tape itself raised serious questions about Hogan's personal life, his marriage, and the company he kept with people capable of such betrayal. When addressing the scandal publicly, Hogan acknowledged his responsibility while also providing context about the emotional and personal circumstances surrounding the situation.
And when he went through a divorce, he thought I had something to do with it. That turned out to be like an 8-year don't talk to each other thing, which we finally got on the same page about 6 months before he passed away, thank you.
When asked about the circumstances that led to the tape's existence and why he found himself in that situation, Hogan admitted his own culpability while trying to explain the context behind his poor decisions.
Take a deep breath. You have to make sure that you're honest, because you have to be accountable. And, you address it, and at the end of the day, pray to God that those that love you and the people close to you, like your friends.
The emotional toll was evident as Hogan explained that this scandal impacted him more deeply than any other controversy in his turbulent life.
When asked, at the end of the day, you realize it was a horrible choice. I am accountable, and any excuse I make, whether it was a rough time in my life or the people that were there were my friends and they kind of like baited me to it, none of that matters. It's just that, you're accountable and be honest.
The steroid controversy Hogan referenced dated back to 1994, when he testified under immunity during Vince McMahon's federal trial for steroid distribution in wrestling. Hogan admitted under oath to using anabolic steroids for nearly 14 years, from 1976 to 1990, contradicting earlier public denials, including a famous appearance on the Arsenio Hall show where he downplayed any drug use. His testimony helped secure McMahon's acquittal by clarifying that McMahon neither supplied nor mandated steroid use, but it revealed the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs in wrestling, with Hogan estimating that 75 to 80% of wrestlers he knew in the 1980s used them regularly. This revelation severely damaged Hogan's carefully crafted image as a wholesome role model who succeeded purely through training, prayers, and vitamins, the very foundation of Hulkamania. Hogan's 2009 divorce from Linda Hogan was equally messy in public, filled with damaging allegations of infidelity involving Christiane Plant, a friend and co-worker of their daughter Brooke, intensifying the sense of family betrayal. In her 2011 memoir, Wrestling the Hulk, My Life Against the Ropes, Linda detailed years of emotional and physical abuse, describing specific incidents where Hogan tore her shirt in anger, threw lamps across rooms, and held her down on beds with his hands around her throat. These incidents created an atmosphere of fear in the Hogan household. Hogan vehemently denied the allegations of abuse and filed a defamation lawsuit against Linda, though the outcome was never publicly disclosed, strongly suggesting an out-of-court settlement with confidentiality provisions. The divorce left deep, lasting scars on the entire family, contributing to years of painful estrangement between Hogan and his daughter Brooke that never fully healed. Brooke Hogan's recent revelations about experiencing extreme verbal and mental abuse since childhood, which frequently turned physical, added another troubling layer to Hogan's complicated legacy as a father. While she clarified that her decision to go completely no contact with both parents was based on their individual treatment of her rather than taking sides, her statements painted a disturbing picture of a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic that contradicted the wholesome, all-American image presented on their reality show Hogan Knows Best, watched by millions of families. The family tragedy worsened in 2007 when Hogan's son Nick was involved in a devastating car accident while street racing under the influence, leaving his passenger and close friend John Graziano with catastrophic, life-altering brain injuries that required round-the-clock care for the rest of his life. The incident would have been devastating on its own, but Hogan faced widespread criticism and public outrage for recorded phone comments made during Nick's jail time, in which he suggested Graziano's permanent injuries were somehow part of God's plan, remarks many found deeply insensitive, tone-deaf, and insulting given the horrific circumstances and the Graziano family's unimaginable suffering. Yet perhaps the clearest insight into Hogan's true character didn't come from any single scandal or controversy, but from The Undertaker's measured, thoughtful assessment of how fans and fellow wrestlers gradually came to understand who Hogan really was beneath the persona. When The Undertaker reflected on Hogan's trajectory and the public's changing perception, he framed it within the broader cultural context, highlighting the tension between Hogan's professional contributions and his personal failings.
Never. And I've been through a lot of stuff. I've been through a lot of stuff, with the federal government, back in the 80s, the whole steroid controversy. I mean, the divorce, the car wrecks. I've been through so much stuff, but never have I ever been this embarrassed, and never has my world been turned upside down in such a fashion.
The Undertaker's words carried particular weight and authority because of his hard-earned reputation as wrestling's conscience and moral center, built over decades of first-hand observation of Hogan's actions and behavior backstage.
We grew up seeing Hogan as this great thing,
bigger in life Americana kind of deal, and then obviously he gets caught on tape saying some derogatory racist thing.
When asked directly about Hogan's place in wrestling history, despite all that had come to light, The Undertaker acknowledged the complicated reality of separating the man from his undeniable contributions to the business they both shared a passion for.
And I think also the other part too is I think the fans themselves have found out what kind of locker room guy he was, and it means a lot to the fans that you're a good locker room guy as well. You know what I mean?
That's probably a good.
Following Hogan's death on July 24th, 2025, the wrestling community and fans worldwide wrestled with the difficult question of how to remember and honor a man whose contributions to the industry were undeniable, yet whose personal failings, prejudices, and betrayals were equally significant and impossible to ignore. Some highlighted his extensive Make-A-Wish Foundation work, having granted more wishes than cultural icons like Michael Jackson, Mr. T, or even Mickey Mouse at various points, bringing joy to terminally ill children in their darkest hours. Others noted his broader charity efforts, generous donations, and the genuine happiness and inspiration he provided to millions of fans across generations who saw him as a hero. Yet many thoughtful observers, particularly in minority communities and among younger fans attuned to social justice, could not separate these positive contributions from the racism, betrayals, lies, and personal scandals that marked his later years and revealed his true character. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, keep the adventure going by clicking one of the suggested videos on your screen for more amazing content.